today's Laughing Hermit reading series. I'm very pleased to see the room so full. Seth, you might be able to roll the volume back a little. I'm pleased to welcome today's two readers, one of whom I have the pleasure of calling a friend, and one who I've just met and look forward to a long and unfolding friendship. But both are excellent poets. I feel very blessed to have these two writers with us today. Anne Colwell and Martha Rhodes are both from out of state, and what I've tried to do in the series usually is have one local writer and one person from out of town, but sometimes schedules didn't permit that, and this was one of them. I'm going to ask Anne to read first, and Anne is an associate professor of English at the University of Delaware, parallel program in Georgetown, Delaware. Her book, Inscrutable Houses, Metaphors of the Body in the Poems of Elizabeth Bishop, was published by the University of Alabama Press in 1997. Her first book of poems, Believing Their Shadows, has been a finalist for the University of Wisconsin's Brittingham Prize and the Anhinga Prize, New Issues Poetry Prize, and the Quarterly Review of Literature Prize. Her poems have appeared in several journals, including most recently the California Quarterly, Evansville Review, Phoebe, and Eclectic Literary Forum. Poetry is also at the heart of her research interest, and she has published several essays concerning American poets, including an article in the Conneticut Review on Anne Bradstreet and Affliction and Conversion Narrative, and an article in Journal X about Elizabeth Bishop's poem, The Fish. She lives in Milton, Delaware. Anne also read for me, I guess about a year, almost a year ago. And one of the things that struck me about Anne's work is how grounded it is in who she is as a person. She speaks with a very clear and strong voice, and it gives me great pleasure to ask her to come back and share her work with us again today. Please welcome Anne Colwell.
Thank you all, and I'd like to thank Robin too for asking me to read and to come back and read again. His belief in me and encouragement of me has meant a great deal. I think I can almost qualify as the local reader, because even though I don't live here anymore, I grew up very near here in Berwyn, Pennsylvania, and my father was from Kensington and my mother was from Mayfair, so really, you know, I kind of quite sort of slip in under the wire. The first poem I'd like to read today is about politeness, and I sort of have a little problem with politeness. Especially verbal politeness. I am egregiously and inappropriately polite. I have what my sister calls politeness build-up, where, you know, thank you, please, excuse me, Merry Christmas, and just keep saying polite things to you until I find the right one. I have a terrible, it's bad. I have a terrible habit of holding the door for people, and as they go through, I thank them. It's very confusing to everyone. And this is a poem that's in a way about politeness. It's also about apologies in general, and apologies for poetry. So it's sort of, in a way, an ars poetica. And it's a very short poem, so don't blink now. It's called Cattle Egret. The egret steps decorously, beyond the clumsy hoof's indifferent threat, but stretches back its long apology, beak and neck, to feed on the ruminating force that tolerates it. In a way, I guess that's what poets do, just sort of peck around where the great big industrial forces are. The next poem is a poem called Funerals and Fairy Tales. My grandmother grew up during the Depression, and I think possibly because she grew up during the Depression, she kept the necks and gizzards of every chicken or turkey that she ever made, and she would keep them and freeze them. And about every couple years, my Uncle Joe would come over her house and open the freezer and say, Jesus, Mary and Joseph, and start pulling out the necks and gizzards and throw them away. And I think that one of the things that happens to us if we live through very hard times of want, like the Depression, is that those hard times mark us. And this is a poem about the way hard times can mark you. Political hard times, because in part the poem is about Czechoslovakia and about Romania, and the terrible years they went through. And also personal hard times, because the poem is also in part about my mother and my mother's alcoholism. So that all sort of gets mixed together. This is a prose poem, and it's called Funerals and Fairy Tales. In Czechoslovakia, a steel mill worker stood on an overturned crate and proclaimed again, "We hold these truths to be self-evident." Here, in an American December, I stood in front of Macy's perfume counter and wished this Christmas I could buy you a present. The counter was a glass box with gold-edged trim. Bottles lay inside, curved like women. I remembered 7 dwarves mourning around a jewel case like that. Gold sides and glass, lined with pillows, fat satin pillows for the crow-black hair and blood-red lips. You and I went to many funerals, followed the obligatory hearse through the iron gates to Holy Angels or St. Anne's, climbed out of our Ford, walked to the plot, the ground uneven, mean with frozen ruts. Or after the thaw, our spiked heels wobbled, sinking into loose soil where something might grow. Mourning always made you sober. But then, like Snow White, you never stayed frightened for long. The witch, in any disguise, the most perfunctory old rags could make you drink. No song, no small neat cottage, no dwarf love could be as red as that apple, all rotted inside, fermented. Until finally I walked from your grave into the salt, dry snow of December. The family ate chicken together and were secretly relieved. The world was instantly new the moment you left it, hopeful for the first time, and irredeemably lost. In Romania, there will be enough food for the winter. Kerchiefed women stand in meat lines grinning. The gruesome dictator has been deposed, and children, whom years of rationing have deprived, who've weathered one after another cruel eastern winter, have oranges, real oranges for the first time. But not knowing the first thing about the sweet pulp of the center, they bite right through the bitter rind. In the interest of equal time, the next poem is about my dad. You gotta balance everything. My father was a PFC, a private first class, just before Korea. And he was assigned to Greenland. So he went where it was terribly, terribly cold. And this is a poem, it's in a way sort of about my father in Greenland. And, my father died about 6 years ago. So it's a poem about missing my father, and it's called Jumping Jacks. All sweeping motions, however mundane, retain drama. Even windshield wipers battling November rain could almost sweep the night clear. Find Venus suspended from a quarter moon. Find the stars executing their slow leap into dawn. Our body's symmetries mean synchronous leaps to connection. The powerful sweep of the dancer, limbs journeying out and back. Or even my father, demonstrating the jumping jack. In truth, it's not to Graham or Baryshnikov my mind leaps. but to my father, in sunny suburbia, furniture pushed against the walls, holding up the U.S. Army Physical Training Manual. In the black and whites, a PFC stands at attention, arms at his side, then legs wide, arms overhead, then back again. He is flanked by arrows to show his progress, or lack, as though he has wings, or has made snow angels on the perfectly white backdrop. My father got the book in basic, no doubt. Then in Greenland, before his time was out, he went AWOL and came back scot-free. He threatened the sergeant that fire burns paper, and the records the Army couldn't replace, and the accounting the sergeant didn't know how, could be undone by one arc of a match. Then my father flew back to sweep my mother off her feet, or so she said after, and her belly rose like a loaf of bread. She bore each of us, one after the other, until the four of us leapt around him laughing, out of rhythm, out of breath. There is nothing as impossible as teaching children the simple grace of jumping jacks. That going away can be one motion with coming back. Like scissors, you said, like wings. And we tried to learn the drama of your sweeping arms. You're going out. You're coming home. Where I lived down in Lewis, Delaware. Let me get a drink of water. Well, near where I live. There is the oldest graveyard in Delaware. It's a great little graveyard right around St. Peter's Episcopal Church there in the center of Lewis. And it has some gravestones from the 1600s in it. Some of you have seen that wonderful little graveyard. I like to go there and I like to read all the tombstones. See the names. There's some interesting, wonderful names in graveyards. Things like Jerusha, hear all those great names on gravestones. There's a great gravestone in that graveyard that it says, Rehoboth Dick, in quotations. And then it gives his dates, and then it says, he died falling off the top floor of the Henlopen Hotel. And you think, I want to know that story. there it is. And I think there's a strange thing about visiting graveyards, about visiting gravestones. It's almost like some people feel it very much as an obligation. My stepmother goes once a year, every year, and visits my father's grave. But then I start to wonder if when we visit, they're obligated to come. Oh, jeez. They've got to come back. So this is a poem about that, actually. It's called Summons. So long as we believe they're here, sleeping with hands folded under the ground, they come back when we come, to inhabit briefly the old bodies, or what's left of them, to humor us. I hear them tonight, whispering their way down through the frozen topsoil as I stand beside their graves. So long as we visit, they have to come, feel an old obligation, like the ones that make us go to nursing homes or school plays. My mother was rain falling on a log, loam at its base, the translucent curl of a wave. Or she was nothing like that, nothing at all. But still, she felt the summons and came, lay down into the mold and bones, put on her wedding ring, curled into what remains of shoes and toes. She accepts my grief, an elaborate gift she can't use. She is impatient for the release of my going, but holds still, understanding that for a while yet, I will keep coming. I grew up Irish Catholic. You can probably tell. not just from the hair, but all the death and guilt in the poems. Just part of it. There are probably marks too. I don't know. One of the great things about growing up Irish Catholic, and growing up Catholic in general, is that you get saints and angels. Saints and angels who are patrons of things. So you're never at a loss for somebody to pray to. If you probably know, if you lose something, you pray to St. Anthony. St. Polycarp is the patron saint of cancer patients. Unless you have something wrong with your eye. If it's cancer of the eye, then it's St. Lucy. St. Bruno the Carthusian, I can't remember what St. Bruno the Carthusian is patron saint of, but I remember that we had to ask him to bless us all the time when we were in school. But St. Geraldine is the patron saint of pregnant women, which is why you have so many Irish Catholic women running around with the name Geraldine. But this is a poem, it's about an angel, and I think I made this angel up, but it's called The Angel of Forgetting. And this is a poem called Instructions. When remembering is useless, when you have given all the words, muscle singing against bone, soul, and you are still alone, surrender. Summon the angel of forgetting. She'll come with eyes like frost on flowers, with hair like fields of snow at night. She'll hold out an empty hand. Put there the torn ticket, the single earring, the button, what you brought in your pocket, what you knew you'd have to give. If she hands it back, there's nothing to do. Go. But if she takes pity on you, she'll close her eyes and sigh, and her breath will move through your veins, cold, numbing, like Novocaine. You will sleep without dreams for 3 nights running. You will find, much later, in the back of some drawer, the button you gave him. But you will not recall the coat he wore, or the October day you walked to the subway station, or when he held your elbow getting on the train. Not too long ago, I read a newspaper story about the 3 boys that were killed right here in Philadelphia on the high-speed train line. And it struck me that it happens over and over again. I mean, it happened when I was a girl. I remember reading about a boy who was killed on the train line. And the thing, of course, that many kids who do this don't realize is that when you play chicken, if you wait too long, the vacuum in front of the train will suck you back into the train, and you can't get off the tracks. And I started to think about that moment, that moment when you're poised between being pulled back into the train and almost escaping, and about the phenomenon of playing chicken. And so this is a poem, it's called Chicken. It is never girls. You never read, 3 girls were killed today by a high-speed train when they jumped the fence. Why? Too practical? They have in them already, from race memory maybe, knowledge of what will kill their children and their children's children by killing them. Sharks, snakes, bridges to be jumped from at night, or anything that looks like these, they scorn, refuse. But there is something in boys not about the future, romantic, in love with what wants them now. They scrambled up the fence down the embankment to the tracks. December. The weeds are brown, and waiting, one shoves red hands into his jacket. You know all the rest. Discussion and dares, quick draws on forbidden cigarettes, sneers. But skip ahead. Try to imagine just the moment when poised, moving forward, you are drawn back into what will destroy you. But both destroy. Forward slowly, backward fast. And how do you know which to choose? when one wants you suddenly so much in that instant, and the other seems every second willing to let go? How do they choose between love and love? And do they accept at the last and relax into a sudden freedom from sinew and muscle and bone, an explosion of self into air, sound, speed? And if there is pain, does it open into a rose of light? Or, finally exhausted, reach the other side of itself like a train rushing into a station where all the boys disembark slowly and stand for a moment looking around at the strange platform and their own unimaginable selves? Robin mentioned when he introduced me that my critical book is about the poetry of Elizabeth Bishop. And I freely confess that I love Bishop's poetry. This is a poem that is based on an Elizabeth Bishop poem that probably many of you know, a poem that is anthologized frequently and widely loved, called In the Waiting Room. And in Bishop's poem, In the Waiting Room, she talks about when she was a girl and she accompanied her aunt to a dentist's office. And the poem really ends up being about this moment when her aunt, whom Bishop calls a foolish, timid woman, her aunt says, "Oh," in pain. And Bishop has this moment of confusion of identity where she thinks she might be her aunt. And it's an interesting poem in some ways because it is very confessional, but not confessional in the style in which a lot of other poets who were writing at the time were confessional, people like Anne Sexton, W.D. Snodgrass, Randall Jarrell. And Bishop at one point was she sort of poo-pooed the whole confessional movement and chose reticence instead. And so this is a poem, it's for Elizabeth Bishop, and it takes place in the waiting room, not of a dentist, but of a psychiatrist, a doctor who Bishop did in fact visit, but never wrote about, while lots of her contemporaries were writing about it. This is called Another Waiting Room for Elizabeth Bishop. My favorite poet, stoic New Englander, spoke about her dentist's antechamber, a childhood memory. I see her frown at me to consider revealing in print a visit to this other doctor. Though she did visit one, that is, and therefore must have waited in rooms like this. Behind the discreet door, the O of pain replaced by the rise and fall of a voice poured out and muffled by a Bach concerto for violin. On the paneled walls around my seat, framed butterflies, symbol of transformation, and birds, for freedom, I suppose, or maybe the good doctor just likes birds. Everywhere I turn, affirmations. The time to be happy is now. The place to be happy is here. I have the courage to be myself. A charge may be made for broken appointments and broken lives. This is where we come to pay. Where I come to say, my mother died drunk, my father did the best he could. I've been fooling doctors like you since I was 12, but find I've nowhere else to turn. Like a faithless pilgrim who's come to the shrine on her knees, I'm waiting for a miracle I won't believe. And maybe I'm closer than I know to where I began. And it's a cavity I've come to fill. And the Bach concerto ended, Arlene Auger sings an aria. No one to love. No one to love. I've no one to love. This is a poem about, another poem about transformation. This is about another kind of transformation. This is about the kind of transformation that happens in fairy tales. like when you're a mermaid and you fall in love with somebody and you get legs. And this poem's called Mermaid. And it's sort of wondering about what it would be like if you got legs, and wouldn't you want that tail again? You know, not that it wouldn't be fun to have legs, but to have that tail. Mermaid. Could she wonders, sneak down to the breakers and slip back in? Just for a couple of hours. One night with a moon in May or September, the first or last one. Awkward, she thinks. Awful. You'd have to flop down to the wave line, painfully bruised, dirty, exhausted. It's an old story and wrong, wrongly told. You don't need to become mute or sell your soul to a sea hag, as Disney or Anderson would have it. Nothing that dramatic. You just see him in the ship and know. You just give up in that moment what you were, which is gone already, in any case, for what you are, which becomes painfully obvious. And if he feels it too, and you build a life around the change, it might be easier, or not. Finding yourself alone, at least you learn to walk without the pain of knowing he watched you fall and fall and fall. But some night, when the frogs come to life again, or just before the whippoorwills leave, she tastes for a minute the sharp, dark brine and thinks, maybe just for a while,